Walking through the dark, still searching for the light. Questions in my heart, but I'm learning how to fight. Every scar a lesson, every step a mystery. Truth in the struggle, written through history. Discovering Christianity. Faith through the storm, truth sets us free. Through the shadows we believe, come and see.
Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are unpacking something that is honestly absolutely fascinating. We're looking at how multiple sources, ranging from deep dive theological teachings to geopolitical analyses, are literally taking today's breaking headlines and overlaying them directly with ancient biblical prophecies. We're talking about looking at the intense, daily unrest in the Middle East, specifically the war and escalating tensions between Israel and Iran, and viewing it all through the lens of texts written thousands of years ago, straight out of the book of Revelation. Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to logically break down these massive ancient concepts into 5 themes: the prophetic epicenter, wars and global tension, technology and global control, societal and moral shifts, and finally, the coming tribulation. So this brings us to the massive question our sources are constantly asking: are we actually living in the end times? The foundational premise across all the material we're looking at today is that this current global unrest, particularly the standoff between Israel and Iran, isn't just your standard geopolitical turf war. To these analysts, it is a literal, real-time fulfillment of Scripture. They see it as a direct sign straight from the ancient prophets. All right, let's dive right into this. Just to set the stage, we are going to impartially explore this specific theological worldview today. To really grasp what these sources are saying, you've got to understand that they don't look at these texts as just symbolic poetry or historical metaphors. No, they view them as highly active, highly literal blueprints. They're arguing that God laid out these exact geopolitical and technological events millennia before modern news networks or politicians even existed.
All right, starting with Section 1, the prophetic epicenter.
To make sense of this prophetic blueprint, the sources say we absolutely have to look at the map, and specifically, Jerusalem. They cite the prophet Zechariah, who wrote, "I will make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people." And honestly, they argue this is a stunningly accurate picture of our modern world. Whether you're talking about the United States, the EU, the UN, or Iran, every single major power is hyper-focused on Jerusalem. It is literally the one city the nations just cannot agree on, exactly as predicted. But it's not just politics. They point to physical, geographical evidence too. Look at this incredible contrast they highlight. Israel's landscape was essentially a barren desert for centuries, but now it's booming agriculturally, which they say perfectly mirrors Isaiah's prophecy about the desert blossoming. Pair that with the ongoing regathering of Jewish people from all over the globe, something Ezekiel 36 talks about. For these analysts, physically restoring the land and returning the people, that's undeniable, tangible proof of prophecy waking up and coming to life. Moving to Section 2, wars and global tension. Of course, with that restoration comes some really intense conflict. The sources point out that Jesus explicitly warned that the last days would be marked by wars and rumors of wars. And let's be real, that phrase feels incredibly relevant when you turn on the news today. There's this really sharp contrast between secular politics and the prophetic worldview. Politicians are always out there chasing ceasefires, right? Declaring peace is just around the corner. But the sources point straight to 1 Thessalonians, which warns that when people start saying peace and safety, that's exactly when sudden destruction hits. Basically, they're arguing that lasting political peace in our current era is fundamentally impossible. Now, what is truly fascinating here is how directly these sources map ancient texts onto today's major players. Take Ezekiel chapter 38, for example. It describes this massive future conflict, often called the Gog-Magog War. These analysts take the ancient names from that text, like Persia, Rush, and Togarmah, and map them directly to modern-day Iran, Russia, and Turkey. So in this view, the unprecedented tension we're seeing right now and the new alliances forming between these specific nations, especially Iran, it is exactly what the prophets saw coming down the pike. And this is exactly why those daily headlines about Israel and Iran are viewed as absolutely critical. When these sources see drone strikes, ballistic missiles flying, and U.S.-brokered ceasefires constantly collapsing, they aren't just seeing a regional dispute. They see the unavoidable, inevitable buildup to a prophesied end-times conflict, perfectly aligning with what those ancient texts demand. Section 3, Technology and Global Control. Because you see, the military aspect is really only half the equation. To get the full picture of this perspective, we have to talk about technology. A huge part of the end times narrative is this worldwide system that basically regulates all of human life. The sources point to the book of Daniel, where an angel says that in the last days, many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. Just think about that for a second. The sources make the case that we are literally the only generation in human history where this makes total sense. We've got the rapid doubling of knowledge, the explosion of artificial intelligence, and the ability to fly across the globe in a single day. So the crucial point they're making is how this tech is actually being applied right now. They outline how the literal infrastructure for a global control system is being built as we speak. We're talking central bank digital currencies, digital IDs, and growing calls for unified global governance. They even point to what's happening on modern battlefields, like unjammable AI military drones tethered by fiber optic cables. The sheer level of surveillance and control that is technologically possible right now is frankly staggering. And here's where it all connects. The sources link all of this modern digital infrastructure directly to Revelation chapter 13. That's the chapter describing a global financial system where no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark. Now, the sources do clarify that we aren't at that exact mark of the beast moment just yet, but they strongly argue that the technological foundation and the political appetite for this kind of unified system are actively being prepared today. Next up, Section 4. Societal and moral shifts. Alongside those massive technological leaps, the sources heavily emphasize the sweeping cultural changes happening all around us. They identify these as major markers of the last days. They frequently bring up Jesus' teaching that the end times will be just like the days of Noah. It's this fascinating paradox, right? Because on the surface, people are just living life, business as usual, eating, drinking, getting married. But beneath that thin veneer of normalcy is a deep, underlying spiritual apostasy. It's an ultimate rejection of God right before a sudden societal breakdown. To these analysts, our current cultural landscape is prime evidence of this moral collapse. They're pointing to an explosion of deception, rising lawlessness, and these deep, bitter ideological wars. They highlight the total redefining of traditional morality, the breakdown of the family unit, and a culture that openly celebrates things the biblical texts define as sin. So to the sources, this widespread departure from biblical truth isn't just society evolving, it's a very specific, perilous, prophesied spiritual darkness. Which brings us to our final theme, Section 5, the coming tribulation. So, where do the sources say all these converging signs, the Middle East tension, the tech, the cultural shifts, where is it all taking us? They all point toward a final prophetic endgame. To understand the timing of this, they look at a really fascinating mathematical puzzle from the prophet Daniel. He outlined a super specific timeline of 70 weeks, which is interpreted as 490 years, specifically for Israel. According to this eschatological math, 483 of those years have already happened in history. The sources believe a giant global pause button was hit, and right now we are just waiting for that final 7-year countdown to begin. And that final 7-year period, that is what's known as the tribulation. The sources define this as a time of just unprecedented global catastrophe, the rise of a one-world government led by the Antichrist, and ultimately divine judgment. They often refer to it as the wrath of the Lamb. It's a harrowing period that is meant to both overthrow corrupt earthly kingdoms and spiritually refine the nation of Israel. The chronological sequence of events they outline looks kind of like this. First, an imminent, totally unexpected event called the rapture, where believers are taken up. That acts as the catalyst. Then the 7-year tribulation kicks off, reaching its absolute darkest point right at the 3.5-year mark with an event called the Abomination of Desolation. Finally, at the very end of this age, the timeline culminates in the second coming of Christ, who descends not as a quiet teacher this time, but as a conquering king to establish total global order. Now, if you're sitting there wondering how to make sense of all of this for yourself, the sources actually give you a specific homework assignment. They highly recommend going and reading Ezekiel chapter 36. They consider this text the absolute master key to understanding God's covenantal dealings with nations, the miraculous regathering of Israel, and that explosive geopolitical reality we are watching on the news every single night. Which leaves us with a pretty profound question to reflect on as we wrap up this explainer. You've seen how meticulously these sources map ancient scriptures to the ongoing war with Iran, to global surveillance tech, and to our modern society. If these texts really are an accurate blueprint of our current geopolitics, what actually happens when the timeline finally runs out? It's definitely something that makes you look at tomorrow's headlines in a completely different light. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and keep your eyes open out there.